Hello everyone, welcome to the channel, welcome back to the channel if you've been here before. This might be a bit of a ramble, but it hopefully won't be. This is my first actual book review relating to June on the Range. So I did a June on the Range video where I talked about what I was going to read, and I really wanted to read more this year than I read last year. Last year I only read 2 books, and this year I wanted to read more than that. But I'm starting a little bit late because I read some Trek stuff for Book Trek, and this month was a little bit slow because of other reasons, because of work and stuff like that. So this is actually the first book I've read, but I've got a few others in mind, and if I have to, I'm going to extend June on the Range by a week or something, so I've got sort of 3 or 4 I can talk about. But this is a book called Troubled Range by j.t.edson. And j.t.edson, I've seen his stuff around a lot, you know, just like in passing. I never used to look at the Western stuff, so this was in passing, but I recognise that name as someone that just, you know, a whole stack of j.t.edson stuff. So I think he's quite visible, if you like. He wrote a lot of novels, so this is from 1965. The book's from 1965. This particular version of it is a little later, 1972 or something, but this came out in 1965. And he wrote hundreds of books, and I sort of read up on it. It's interesting. He's an English author, j.t.edson. He's an English author who never lived the cowboy life or never lived any life that related at all to anything that he wrote about in these westerns. But these are like sort of romanticized sort of fantasy westerns, if you like. So you could argue there's a bit of a lowest common denominator thing going on here, where it's all the tropes are there, and there's sort of you know, these heroic characters, and you've got all the cliches of the women in the saloons and all that sort of stuff. But I really enjoyed it, and this was the first one. I deliberately went, by the way, for my first one for this year. I deliberately went for something that I thought would be kind of like the cheesy end of the westerns. So I know that I've got True Grit to read, and last year I read Shane, and I think Shane and True Grit are probably seen as much more respectable westerns, I would have thought. But I wanted to go with this because I thought this is probably more representative of the general western genre. So I thought this would be a nice way to start. It's not massively long. It was only 130 something, no, 160 pages. Wasn't very long, and it's all about Mark Counter, who's a guy who belongs to a sort of an outlaw group, and is sort of associated with a very famous, not in reality famous, but a very famous within the story outlaw called Dusty Fogg. Brilliant name, Dusty Fogg. And but he is definitely the main character. And one of the interesting things for me as well is that Calamity Jane features in this a lot. So all the time I was reading about Calamity Jane, I had this in my head. But once you read up on Calamity Jane, you're supposed to have this in your head. But I read up again on this author after reading this, and he actually was on record to say that it's the Calamity Jane that he includes in his stories. He featured a number of times, is not the real Calamity Jane. So it didn't really matter if I had this in my head, because it wasn't the actual Calamity Jane anyway. But anyway, this book is in 3 parts, 3 stories, on various lengths as well. So the third story is really short. There are 3 quite different stories as far as plot goes. He's a very consistent character, so he is kind of an honourable character. He's not an anti-hero. He's definitely like an outlaw with a good heart, and through the stories he does the right thing each time, but he's quick on the draw, and he doesn't take any messing around. And what's really interesting about it is that for some reason in all 3 stories, and I don't know if this is just the j.t.edson thing, but there's like a pair of women in each story, different women, that feature heavily in the plot. And in the first two stories, there's like a very long and significant cat fight where the two women are fighting. And I don't know if he just likes writing about two women fighting or not, but that was in the first two stories. But I did enjoy the book, and my favourite story out of the three of them was the first one, the one about Calamity Jane. And I think I liked the energy in the story. There was a lot of energy in the second story as well. I think the third story wasn't quite as good, but there was a lot of energy to it. It was bubbling away quite nicely, and you had this really kind of spiky dialogue, and you had endearing characters. I think there's a possibility, especially when reading up on the author, that there may be some dodgy stuff in some of the books, but there wasn't really anything like that here. I thought the women in the book were portrayed quite positively, in the sense that they were strong characters. I mean, there was obviously the old values, like, you know, their roles in the story. They weren't leading the story, and they were their part was being played from a particular position, social position, if you like. But having said that, the characters themselves had strong personalities and wouldn't take any messing around. And you know, the some elements that I thought were quite nice to see, as it was written in the 60s. And I didn't see there was the second story features a Chinese woman as one of the main characters, and one of the other characters keeps referring to her. Well, actually, a lot of the characters keep referring to her as the foreign woman. So I don't think that's particularly offensive, but it might be. Well, it clearly is an indication of the period. I don't think people would do that now necessarily, but it was the character speaking, and as far as I know, I don't know if j.t.edson had any issues with Chinese women, but again, quite a cute kind of depiction of that relationship. I don't really necessarily think it was a negative portrayal of the Chinese character, and as I said, I did like that story. So yeah, and the third story was a kidnapping that was a little bit more run-of-the-mill. But I didn't know what was going to happen next in these stories. So there was this sort of element of surprise and element of mystery to it, if you like, because I didn't know what was going to what was going to transpire. So I thought that was good, and yeah, I think it rattled along quite nicely. It wasn't particularly deep, but yeah. I thought it was going to be awful. So yeah, j.t. Edson's Troubled Range was the first one in my June on the Range books this year. I'm going to try and read True Grit next. I've got a couple of other very short paperback things, and I do want to get to the Elmore Leonard ones as well. I've got True Grit over there that I'm going to start, that I'm expecting good things about. But yeah, I was pleasantly surprised by this. If you read any j.t. Edson, let me know. Thanks a lot for watching. Bye.
Paint me a picture of what it's like to